It had been a long day for Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. As he sat in his office, the soft hum of the city outside seemed a distant memory. He glanced at his watch, realizing that yet another meeting was about to begin. But as his hand hovered over the mouse, ready to click into the meeting link, his phone buzzed on the desk. Sundar picked up the phone, glancing at the screen. The name flashing across the screen made his heart skip a beat. Priya. It had been years since he had heard that name, a name he thought he had left behind in his past. Priya, his high school ex-girlfriend. The woman who had once shared his dreams and hopes. A woman who had left an indelible mark on his heart. The message was simple, yet the words were enough to make him pause. Sundar, we need to talk. I'm in town for a few days. Can we meet? Stared at the message, his mind racing. So many memories flooded back, memories of their first meeting. The laughter they shared, and the unspoken promise they made to each other before life took them down separate paths. They were just teenagers then, full of ambition and dreams. But after graduation, they drifted apart. Sundar had moved to the United States to pursue his education and career. Priya had stayed behind, focusing on her own path, never once reaching out again. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call. He took a deep breath and answered it. Priya, he said, his voice betraying a hint of emotion. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I know, Sundar. It's been a long time, she replied, her voice soft and warm. I didn't want to interrupt your life, but there's something important I need to tell you. Sundar's curiosity grew. What could she possibly need to tell him now, after all these years? He had built an entire career, a life, since they last spoke. And yet, her voice brought him back to a time when things were simpler. A time when the world was just a collection of dreams, waiting to be pursued. How about we meet at the cafe by the river? Sundar suggested, trying to keep his emotions in check. It's been a while, and I think we both deserve some closure. The decision was made. Sundar walked out of his office and into the bustling streets of Silicon Valley, his mind still racing with thoughts of Priya. What could she possibly have to tell him? He had built a life of precision, of calculated risks and decisions. This felt different. This felt like a twist of fate. As he sat across from her at the cafe, Sundar noticed how little had changed. Priya still had that same smile, the one that made his heart skip a beat when they were younger. But there was something different now, something heavier in her eyes. Sundar, she began, her voice trembling. I'm not sure how to say this, but you need to know, You have a son. Sundar felt his world stop. The words echoed in his mind, but they didn't make sense. A son? How could that be? Priya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I never told you. After we broke up, I found out I was pregnant. I didn't want to complicate things, so I left, raised him alone. But now he's asking about his father. Sundar stared at her, his mind reeling. He had always imagined his future in terms of his work, his goals, his ambitions. But this, this was something he hadn't prepared for. A son? A child he had no idea about? The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of her words. Finally, Sundar spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Why now? Why are you telling me this after all these years? Priya looked away, struggling to find the right words. I didn't want to keep him from you, Sundar. But I also didn't want him to grow up in the shadow of a man who was too busy to care. Sundar's heart ached as he listened to her. He had built a life filled with success, accolades, and recognition. But in that moment, he realized that all of it felt hollow compared to the possibility of a son he never knew existed. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. His mind was flooded with questions, with doubts, with emotions he had never expected to feel. Was he ready to become a father? Could he be the kind of father his son needed? As Priya spoke about her life and her son, Sundar felt like he was watching a stranger, a woman he once knew, but had lost touch with over the years. But as she spoke of the boy, Sundar felt something stir inside him, a connection, a pull that he couldn't explain. Can I meet him? Sundar finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Priya nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. I thought, you'd say that? He's staying with me for a few days. I didn't want to spring this on you, but I felt you needed to know. He needs to know you. The weight of her words hit Sundar like a ton of bricks. He had always seen himself as a man of logic, a man who made decisions based on facts and figures. But this was beyond logic. This was life, raw and unpredictable. As Sundar left the cafe, his mind was in turmoil. What did this mean for him? Could he balance the life he had built with the responsibility of being a father? Was he ready to meet this child, a child he had never known, but now felt an undeniable connection to? The evening sky had darkened as Sundar walked along the river, the soft rustle of the leaves whispering in the wind. He didn't have answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine, and he was about to meet the son he never knew he had. Sundar spent the rest of the evening in a daze. His usual precision and focus were nowhere to be found. He sat at his desk, surrounded by paperwork and reports, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. His thoughts kept returning to Priya's words. You have a son, how could that be? It seemed impossible. He had spent years building his career, making decisions based on facts and data. But this was different. There was no formula to follow here, no roadmap to guide him. Sundar closed his eyes and thought back to the last time he had seen Priya. They were in high school, young and full of dreams. Life had been simple then. They were two kids, each with a different vision for the future, but somehow intertwined. But after graduation, life took them in separate directions. He went off to study in the United States, focusing on his education, while Priya stayed behind. They had both made their choices. But Sundar had never expected that those choices would lead to a revelation like this. A son? As the night wore on, Sundar couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had lived a life of control, of planning every move and predicting every outcome. But this was different. There were no answers in spreadsheets or graphs. There was just uncertainty, fear, and a growing sense of responsibility. The next morning, Sundar stood in front of his mirror adjusting his shirt. His reflection seemed distant, almost like a stranger. He looked at the clock. It was time. He had agreed to meet Priya and her son at the park. His mind raced with questions. What if he wasn't ready? What if his son didn't want to meet him? What if he wasn't the father this child needed? He pushed the doubts aside. There was no turning back now. Sundar arrived at the park early, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of Priya. He walked around the large fountain, trying to calm his nerves. The park was quiet in the early morning light, the soft hum of the city just a distant murmur. As he stood by the fountain, he saw Priya approaching, holding a young boy's hand. Sundar's heart skipped a beat. The boy was tall for his age, maybe around 12 or 13, with dark hair and bright eyes. He had a mischievous smile that reminded Sundar of someone, but he couldn't place it. Hi, Sundar, Priya said, her voice calm but shaky. This is Arjun. Sundar looked at the boy, who was staring at him with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. There was an awkward silence as Sundar knelt down to meet the boy's gaze. Hi, Arjun, Sundar said softly, his voice unsteady. I'm Sundar. I'm your father. The words felt strange as they left his lips. He had never imagined saying something like that. But here he was, in front of a son he had never known, a boy who was now a part of his life in a way he couldn't yet understand. Arjun didn't say anything at first. He simply nodded, his eyes wide as he studied Sundar. There was a tension in the air, the weight of the moment hanging between them. I didn't know about you, Sundar continued, his voice filled with an emotion he couldn't hide. But now that I do, I want to be here for you. If you'll have me. Arjun shifted uncomfortably. I don't really know you, he said quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Sundar's heart sank. He understood the boy's hesitation. How could Arjun possibly know him? He was a stranger to him, just as Sundar was to him. Priya stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. It's okay, Arjun. I know this is a lot to take in. But Sundar's here now. He wants to get to know you. Sundar stood up, trying to steady his emotions. The boy's response had stung, but it was a reality he had to face. This wasn't going to be easy. They walked together to a nearby bench, the silence stretching between them. Sundar tried to think of something to say, but the words wouldn't come. The boy sat stiffly, his arms crossed over his chest, looking anywhere but at Sundar. Do you like soccer? Sundar finally asked, trying to break the ice. Arjun's eyes flickered with interest. Yeah, I play on the school team. Smiled. I used to play soccer when I was your age. Maybe we can watch a game together sometime. Arjun didn't respond immediately, but his expression softened just a little. It was a small victory, but it was something Priya watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. Sundar could feel her eyes on him, and he wondered what she was thinking. She had raised this boy alone for so many years, and now she was introducing him to a man he barely knew. Sundar couldn't help but feel the weight of her expectations. Never wanted to complicate things for you, Priya said quietly, approaching them. I didn't want to make your life harder, Sundar. But I also didn't want Arjun to grow up without knowing his father, not at his heart heavy with guilt. I understand, Priya. I wish I could have been there for you both. The words hung in the air, unspoken. As Sundar looked back at Arjun, the boy's walls were still up. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, uncertainty, yes, but also a flicker of hope. This was just the beginning. Sundar knew it. Wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in a long while, Sundar felt something he hadn't felt in years, something beyond the world of technology, numbers, and business decisions. He felt the stirrings of something more meaningful, something that was not based on success or failure, but on connection. Arjun looked up at him again, his gaze meeting Sundar's for the first time, without hesitation. For a brief moment, there was a shared understanding between them. It's a bond that neither of them fully understood yet, but both of them felt. I think I'd like to watch a game with you sometime, Arjun said quietly, the first real words of connection. Sundar smiled, a warmth spreading through him. I'd like that too. The afternoon slipped away as they talked about soccer, school, and their lives. Sundar wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to walk away. Not now. Not when there was a chance to build something real with the son he never knew he had. But as they said their goodbyes, Sundar couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated than he ever imagined. The challenges ahead were unknown, but there was a deeper connection growing between them, one that neither time nor distance could erase. And as Sundar watched Priya and Arjun walk away, he realized that, for the first time in a long time, he had found something that truly mattered, something that would change the course of his life forever. The next few days passed in a blur for Sundar. His mind was a constant whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and questions. Had met his son. That simple fact, so life-changing, was still hard to wrap his head around. Sundar's days were filled with meetings and conference calls, but in the quiet moments between, his mind would wander back to Arjun. The boy was quiet, distant, but there were sparks of something between them, something that felt like it could grow into something real. Priya had messaged Sundar the night after their meeting. Arjun has been asking about you, she had said. He's a little unsure, but I think he wants to get to know you. Sundar's heart swelled with hope, but he also knew it wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't like any business deal he had ever negotiated. This was about trust, vulnerability, and patience. He couldn't approach this like he would a tech project, with timelines and clear outcomes. No, this would be messy, unpredictable, and take time. But it was worth it. He decided to reach out to Priya. He needed to find a way to spend more time with Arjun, show him that he wasn't just some distant figure in his life. Sundar, I think Arjun would enjoy playing soccer this weekend, Priya. Texted him the next morning. It's something he loves. Maybe you could join him for a game at the park. Sundar felt a rush of warmth. He had played soccer as a boy, and though he was no expert, he knew the joy it brought. He was eager to share this part of himself with Arjun. "Sounds great," Sundar replied. "I'll be there. I'll bring my old sneakers." When the weekend arrived, Sundar found himself waiting in the same park where they had met. The familiar sights of children laughing, families walking, and birds chirping made the place feel comforting and safe. It felt like a good place for something new to begin. He spotted Arjun and Priya near the soccer field. Arjun was kicking a ball back and forth with a few friends, his face lighting up with concentration and excitement. Sundar's heart skipped as he watched him. The boy was full of energy, his body moving with an athletic grace that reminded Sundar of himself at that age. Priya noticed Sundar approaching and smiled. "Glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it," Sundar replied, his voice full of anticipation. He walked up to Arjun, who was now eyeing him cautiously. "Mind if I join you?" Sundar asked, trying to sound casual. Arjun hesitated. The boy had his defenses up, as expected. Sundar couldn't blame him. After all, they were strangers. But there was something about the way Arjun looked at him, something that hinted at curiosity, if not yet trust. "Sure," Arjun said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You can try to keep up," Sundar chuckled, grateful. For the boy's sense of humor, he wasn't sure if it was a challenge or an invitation, but it didn't matter. Sundar was determined to do his best, to show Arjun that he was there, not just for the game, but for the long haul. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sundar wasn't the best soccer player, but he kept up. He ran, kicked, and laughed. As Arjun showed him how to do some of the tricks he had learned, Sundar found himself genuinely enjoying the moment, the shared experience. The way the boys' laughter felt like a bridge between them. For the first time, he could see past the walls Arjun had built. The boy wasn't distant anymore. He was just a kid, trying to figure out this strange new world where his father wasn't someone he had known his whole life. As they took a break, both of them sat on the grass, catching their breath. Arjun wiped his forehead with his sleeve and looked at Sundar. "Are you really my dad?" Arjun asked, his voice quiet, almost as if he wasn't sure if he should ask. "I mean, I never knew about you. I thought you were just some guy, but you seem nice." Sundar felt a lump in his throat. This was it, the moment he had feared and hoped for. He turned to Arjun, looking him in the eyes. "Yes," Sundar said, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I'm your dad. I know I wasn't there before, and I can't change that. But I'm here now. I want to be a part of your life." Arjun looked away for a moment, his gaze focused on the ball at his feet. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. "Okay." It was small, but it was enough. For the first time, Sundar felt like they were beginning to understand each other, like a fragile bridge was forming between them. Priya joined them on the grass, her eyes watching the interaction carefully. Sundar noticed how she seemed to study him, as if searching for signs that this time things might be different. "Thank you for doing this, Sundar," she said softly. "I know it's not easy. It's for either of you." Sundar nodded, but his mind was still on Arjun. The boy had taken the first step. And that meant more than words could say. "I'm just getting started," Sundar said. "I'm not going anywhere." As the afternoon wore on, Sundar and Arjun spent more time together, talking about soccer, school, and life. Arjun began to relax, his guard lowering just a little bit more with every passing minute. When it was time to leave, Arjun turned to Sundar. "Maybe we can do this again?" asked, his voice tentative but hopeful. Sundar smiled. "I'd like that very much." That evening, as Sundar sat alone in his office, he found himself reflecting on the day. A part of him was still overwhelmed by everything. How could he have missed out on so much of Arjun's life? He had spent so many years focused on his career, his goals, and now this son who had grown up without him was slowly opening up to him. But there was something else too. Something he hadn't anticipated. A sense of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was real. He could build something here. He could make up for lost time, if only Arjun was willing to give him the chance. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his responsibility settle into his bones. This was only the beginning, but it was the kind of beginning he had never imagined. And as he picked up his phone to text Priya, telling her he had enjoyed the day more than he had expected, he realized one thing for sure. Nothing in his life had ever mattered more than this. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate dance for Sundar. Each day was an exploration, an attempt to bridge the gap between himself and Arjun. The boy was still cautious, still holding back, but Sundar could feel a subtle shift in their interactions. There were moments of warmth, fleeting yet precious, and there were times when Arjun would laugh, a genuine sound that made Sundar's heart feel lighter. But Sundar knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The small victories, soccer games, the casual conversations were only the beginning. There were still many unspoken words between them, many emotions that needed to be addressed. And Arjun's trust wasn't something that could be earned overnight. Sundar tried to keep his expectations in check. He knew that his son's life had been shaped by years without him, and he couldn't expect instant warmth or acceptance. But the small moments, the way Arjun had shared a joke with him, the way he had asked for advice about school, those were the things Sundar held on to, hoping they were signs of progress. It was a Saturday afternoon when Priya called. Sundar was at home, catching up on emails, when her name appeared on his phone screen. He answered immediately. "Hi, Priya," he said, his voice steady. "How's everything going?" "Everything's fine," Priya replied, but there was something in her tone that made Sundar's heart beat a little faster. "But Arjun's been distant lately." Sundar's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Priya paused before answering, as though carefully considering her words. "He's been quieter, less open. Says he's fine, but I can tell something's bothering him. I think it's because of the whole situation with you. He doesn't know how to process all of this." Sundar felt a pang of guilt. He'd been so focused on trying to build a relationship with Arjun that he hadn't stopped to consider the emotional weight the boy was carrying. Of course, it wasn't just a matter of Arjun getting used to having a father. He had to reconcile the years of feeling abandoned, being raised without that figure in his life. "I think I need to give him more space," Sundar said slowly, his voice filled with realization. "I've been pushing too hard, trying to make up for lost time. But I need to let him come to me on his own terms." Priya's voice softened. "I think that's a good idea. Just remember, Sundar, he's a teenager. He's going through a lot. It's not just about you. It's about him finding his own way." Sundar nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I understand. I'll be patient." The next few days were a turning point. Sundar decided to take a step back, allowing Arjun to set the pace. He didn't reach out as frequently, didn't push for more time together. He let the boy come to him when he was ready. It wasn't easy. Sundar's instincts told him to fix things, to do whatever it took to make up for the years he had missed. But he knew deep down that this wasn't something that could be fixed quickly. Arjun needed time to process everything, to understand that this new chapter wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was real, and it was lasting. It was during one of these quieter moments that Arjun reached out. It was a Tuesday evening when Sundar received a text. "Can we talk?" Sundar's heart skipped a beat. The message was simple, but it meant everything. Arjun wanted to talk, not about soccer, not about school, but something deeper. Sundar quickly typed back, "Of course. Where should we meet?" The next evening, they met at a quiet cafe near Arjun's school. It wasn't their usual hangout, but Sundar could sense that Arjun was looking for something different, something outside of the familiar places they had been before. As Sundar sat down, he saw Arjun already there, sitting at a table by the window. The boy's posture was tense, his arms crossed over his chest. Sundar took a deep breath and walked over. "Hey," Sundar said gently, sitting down across from him. "What's on your mind?" Arjun stared at his hands for a moment before speaking. "I don't really know how to say this." Sundar leaned forward slightly, giving the boy space to find his words. "It's okay, Arjun. You can tell me anything." Arjun hesitated, and Sundar could see the conflict in his eyes. It was clear that this was a moment of reckoning for Arjun. "I've been thinking a lot about you," he said quietly. "About us." Sundar's heart tightened. This was the conversation he had been dreading and hoping for. "I don't really know how to feel," Arjun continued, his voice faltering. "On one hand, I want to be close to you. I want to get to know you. But on the other hand, I don't know how to trust you. You weren't there. You weren't there when I needed you. Sundar nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. I understand, he said, his voice calm but filled with remorse. I can't change the past. I can't undo the years I wasn't there for you, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Arjun looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and pain. It's not that simple, you know? I'm not some puzzle that you can just fix by showing up. Sundar nodded again, this time with more urgency in his voice. I know it's not that simple. I'm not trying to fix anything. What I'm saying is that I want to be here for you. I want to build a relationship with you, no matter how long it takes. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Arjun was looking at him, his face a mix of emotions. It was raw, it was real, and Sundar could see the vulnerability underneath, the anger and hurt. Finally, Arjun spoke, his voice softer this time. I don't know if I can just forgive you, Sundar. I don't even know if I want to. Sundar's chest tightened, but he kept his composure. You don't have to forgive me right now. And you don't have to want to, but I'm here. I'll wait. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything that had been said. Arjun looked away, staring out the window. Sundar could feel the tension, the uncertainty that still remained. But there was something else, too. A shift. A flicker of something that told him that maybe, just maybe, Arjun wasn't completely shutting him out. I'll give you time, Sundar said, his voice steady. Whenever you're ready, we can talk. Or we can just hang out. I'm not going anywhere. Arjun didn't answer right away, but Sundar could see the boy's expression soften just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was something. As they parted ways that evening, Sundar walked away with a heavy heart. But for the first time, he felt like they were moving forward. Slowly, but surely. Arjun wasn't ready to forgive him, and that was okay. But Sundar was determined to show the boy that he wasn't going anywhere. He would be there day by day. No matter how long it took, the journey was just beginning, but Sundar knew that if he was patient, if he kept showing up for Arjun, there was hope. Hope that someday they could find a way to heal together. The days after their conversation at the cafe felt heavier than ever for Sundar. He'd poured his heart out to Arjun, and while there had been a shift, albeit small, it felt fragile, like a delicate seed just beginning to sprout. But the waiting was unbearable. Every time he reached out, there was that hesitation from Arjun, a reluctance to fully engage. He wasn't ready. Sundar understood that. But it didn't make it any easier. He spent the next few days deep in thought. Reflecting on his own feelings, he had always been in control, always made decisions with precision and logic. But fatherhood, this journey with Arjun, was nothing like that. There were no clear rules, no predictable outcomes. It was raw, messy, and, at times, painful. Sundar found himself scrolling through old photos of his own childhood, pictures of his family, of his parents, of moments that seemed so far removed from where he was now. It made him think of his own father, a man who had always been a distant figure, focused on his work and achievements, never quite knowing how to connect with his son. Sundar had spent years trying to be different, trying to avoid that same distance. Yet here he was, struggling to bridge the gap with a son he had only just met. But Sundar had made a commitment. He couldn't undo the years that had passed, but he could show Arjun that he was serious about being a part of his life. He could prove, through actions, that he wasn't going to give up. It was on a quiet Wednesday evening when Sundar got a message from Priya. The text was brief, but it sent a wave of uncertainty through him. Arjun wants to talk. Skipped. He didn't hesitate. Quickly responded. When and where? Priya's reply came almost immediately. He wants to meet at the park, same place as last time. Dar was already preparing himself for whatever the conversation might be. He wasn't sure what to expect. Another tough talk, more silence, or perhaps even a breakthrough. He knew that he couldn't predict the outcome, but he was ready to face whatever came next. The park was quieter that evening than it had been before. Sundar walked through the familiar gates and made his way to the bench where he had first met Arjun. As he sat down, he tried to steady his nerves. His palms were clammy, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what had changed in the days since their last meeting, but something in the air felt different. There was an odd sense of anticipation, but also fear. Fear that maybe Arjun wasn't ready for this. Fear that perhaps Sundar wasn't ready either. It didn't take long before he saw Arjun approaching, walking with a sense of purpose. The boy's steps were firm, his shoulders squared in a way that seemed to indicate he had made up his mind about something. Sundar stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey Arjun," Sundar said, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed his nerves. "Hey," Arjun replied, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about everything." Sundar nodded, waiting for the next words. The weight of them felt almost suffocating, but he had learned that patience was his only option now. Arjun sat down on the bench, pulling his knees up to his chest. He didn't look at Sundar at first, his eyes focused on the ground in front of him. There was a long silence before he spoke again. "I don't know why I'm so mad at you," Arjun said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you didn't mean to be gone all these years, but it still hurts. It hurts to know that you were out there. I had to grow up without you." Sundar's throat tightened as he listened. Anger, the hurt, it was all there, raw and real. He had heard it before, in Arjun's words, in the silence, but to hear it now, to see it in the boy's eyes, it was different. It cut deeper than he had anticipated. "I can't undo the past, Arjun," Sundar said, his voice quiet but steady. "I can't make up for those years, no matter how much I want to. But I can promise you this, Sim, here now, not going anywhere." Arjun looked up at him then, his eyes meeting Sundar's for the first time in what felt like forever. There was still hurt there, still that wall between them, but there was also something else, a glimmer of understanding. "I don't know how to trust you yet," Arjun said, his words measured, almost uncertain. "But I want to, I really do." Sundar's heart swelled. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness, but it was a start. Arjun was opening up, piece by piece, and that was enough. "It's going to take time," Sundar said, his voice thick with emotion. "I understand, but I'll be here no matter what. We'll take it one day at a time." Arjun nodded slowly, still looking at him, as though he was testing the waters, trying to decide if Sundar's words could be trusted. There was a moment of silence, a pause that felt like an eternity. "I've been thinking about something," Arjun said, breaking the silence. "I want to know more about you, about who you are now, what you do, I guess. I want to know what kind of person you've become." Sundar couldn't help the smile that tugged at the corners of his lips. It was a small thing, but it was huge. For the first time, Arjun wasn't just talking about the past. He was talking about the future. "I'd like that," Sundar said, his voice full of warmth. "I'd like that very much." They spent the next hour talking about Sundar's life, his work, his dreams, his regrets. It wasn't a deep conversation, but it felt like the beginning of something. Arjun listened, asked questions, and sometimes just nodded. They talked about soccer, about school, about little things that made up their everyday lives. It wasn't the big emotional conversation that Sundar had anticipated, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were talking. They were connecting. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Arjun stood up. "I should go," he said, his tone still hesitant but somehow lighter than before. Sundar stood as well, walking alongside him for a few steps. "I'll see you soon?" he asked, the question hanging in the air. Arjun turned to him, offering a small, tentative smile. "Yeah, soon." It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was the first real connection they had made. There was still a long road ahead, full of twists and turns, but Sundar felt a new sense of hope rising within him. Arjun wasn't fully there yet. He wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but he was starting to see him. He was starting to want to build something with him, and that was all Sundar needed for now. Fragile hope, the beginning of a bond. That, though imperfect, was real. As Arjun walked away, Sundar felt a quiet, steady optimism. The journey was far from over, but it was no longer one-sided. They were in this together, even if it took time to truly understand each other. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like enough. It had been a few weeks since their meeting at the park, and Sundar felt the weight of each day pressing down on him. Arjun had started calling him more frequently, just small check-ins, nothing too deep, but it was something. The conversations were short, sometimes awkward, but they were still conversations. It felt like they were building a bridge, one cautious step at a time. Sundar had learned to be patient. He had learned that no matter how many times he tried to explain himself, no matter how many grand gestures he made, the trust between him and Arjun wouldn't come overnight. It was something that had to be earned, slowly, steadily. There were no shortcuts, no easy fixes. That was the hard truth, but there were moments, small moments, that gave him hope. Like the time Arjun had reached out to ask for advice on a school project, or when they'd run into each other at the cafe, and Arjun had waved him over with a grin. Those were the moments that kept Sundar going, those small glimpses of connection. One afternoon, Sundar was at his desk, working through a mountain of emails, when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Priya. Arjun wants to come over. He's been talking about spending more time with you? Sundar felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The first real sign that Arjun was willing to take the next step. He quickly typed back, "Of course." When Priya's reply was swift, "He'll be there in an hour." Sundar took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He wasn't sure what to expect. Was Arjun ready to take the next step? Was this a casual visit or something more? Either way, Sundar knew he had to be patient. He had to let Arjun set the pace. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Sundar's heart raced as he opened the door to find Arjun standing there, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He was wearing the same cautious expression he always did, but there was something different this time. Something that felt just a little less guarded. "Hey," Arjun said, offering a small smile. "Hey," Sundar replied, his voice warm. "Come in." Arjun stepped inside, glancing around the house as if taking in the details, the unfamiliar spaces. It was strange, having his son here in a place that had always felt so much like his own. Now, with Arjun here, it felt different. Like it was no longer just his space, it was a space they could share. Maybe. They sat down in the living room, a comfortable silence settling between them. Sundar didn't want to push, didn't want to jump into heavy conversation too soon. They needed to find their rhythm, just like they had in the park. "So," Sundar began, trying to sound casual. "How's school going?" Arjun shrugged, a typical teenager response. But then he looked up at Sundar with a small smile. "Okay, you know how it is. Lots of work." Sundar chuckled. "Yeah, I remember those days. Nothing ever seems to be easy at school." Arjun nodded, his smile widening a little. Exactly. It was small, but it felt like a breakthrough. The conversation wasn't awkward. They weren't trying too hard. They were just talking. After a few moments, Sundar took a breath and decided to say what had been on his mind for days. "Arjun," began carefully, "I know it hasn't been easy for you. I know things between us are still new, and I get that it's a lot to take in. But I want you to know that I'm here, no matter what, and I'm willing to wait. We don't have to rush anything." Arjun didn't look up at first. He stared at his hands, fiddling with the sleeve of his jacket, his gaze distant. Sundar held his breath, waiting for something, anything, just to know where they stood. Finally, Arjun spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I don't know if I can just forget about everything," he said, his words full of uncertainty. "It's hard. I've spent my whole life without you. It's hard to imagine things being different." Sundar's heart sank, but he didn't let his disappointment show. "I get it," he said gently. "I understand. And I don't expect you to forget. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." There was another long silence, but this time it felt different. It wasn't uncomfortable, just thoughtful, as if Arjun was weighing his words carefully. "I'm not ready to call you Dad," Arjun said, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't think I can just do that, but I think maybe I can try. Try to get to know you. Try to see what this is." Sundar felt a lump form in his throat. Wasn't the perfect answer, but it was enough. It was the first real sign that Arjun was opening up to the possibility of something more. I thought that was all Sundar could ask for. I'm not asking you to call me anything you're not ready for, Sundar replied, his voice thick with emotion. I just want to be a part of your life, however you need me to be. Arjun nodded, his eyes finally meeting Sundar's. For the first time, Sundar saw something different in his eyes, something softer, more open. Maybe this wasn't the end of their journey. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something real. They spent the next few hours together, talking about everything and nothing. They shared a meal, watched a movie, and for the first time, Sundar felt like they were truly connecting. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Slow, steady progress. As the evening came to a close, Arjun stood up to leave, his bag slung over his shoulder. Thanks for dinner, he said. I'll see you later. Sundar smiled, his heart full. Anytime, Arjun. Anytime. Arjun paused at the door, then turned around. You know, maybe next time we can watch that soccer game you were talking about. Sundar's smile widened. I'd like that very much. Arjun's lips twitched into a small grin before he turned and walked out the door, leaving Sundar standing there, filled with hope. For the first time in a long time, Sundar felt like everything was possible. The road ahead was still uncertain, but there was a flicker of something real between him and Arjun. It wasn't perfect, it might never be, but it was something, and that was enough. As Sundar closed the door behind him, he stood still for a moment, taking in the silence. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic moments, but there was something far more powerful than that understanding. A connection that was slowly but surely being built. One day at a time, and that was enough for him. For now, for the first time, it felt like they were finally on the right path.